Your winning season begins today, only at MyBookie.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
Never a dull moment for sure, Will Miles. There we go. This is the Gators Breakdown podcast, and we're ready to go here. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me as he does every Monday evening is Will Miles from his site, readandreaction.com, and on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Will, man, we're supposed to be reviewing a Florida LSU game that was supposed to happen Saturday, and man, since the last time we talked a week ago, so much has changed in Gator Nation, as the moniker lives in full strength right now.
Yeah, normally it takes more than 12 hours before our podcast is completely irrelevant when it comes to the goings on in Gator Nation. But last week, our timing could probably not have been worse, as they had the press conference on Monday, and then we sort of came and talked about what was going to happen next week, and then all of a sudden the next day, pretty much everything's getting canceled. So, hey, I mean, we knew that this was a possibility. We knew that was one of the things that might happen with the virus. Obviously, Florida, not the only team impacted. Alabama somehow miraculously figured out a way to get its coach back in 3 days, and we've got, 30 guys quarantining for a month, it seems like. But, hey, 2020, that's the way the season is. We knew people were going to have to roll with the punches. Teams were going to have to roll with the punches. Obviously, this has some repercussions for Florida. Maybe on a good side, maybe on a bad side. We'll see. I mean, I think it sort of depends on maybe how things go the next couple of weeks. But, Florida has an opportunity to regroup, which maybe they wouldn't have had otherwise. But obviously, not being able to practice is also an issue. And we saw how bad the tackling was in games 1, 2, and 3. After coming off of an off-season where they didn't get to practice very much. And so hopefully they can right the ship, and the defense can start to turn it around, and the offense can keep humming, and we'll see where we end up.
Yeah, I think, we were trying to talk before the show here. I think it can go two ways. I think they can either, like you said, rally around. They got a lot of stuff to watch and get better at. But also, we don't know when this team, we'll get into it right after kind of the intro here, but, when the team can get back together at full strength and before the Missouri game, October 31st. So a lot of questions out there. And like I said, they could either rally behind this or completely fall apart here. So we'll see where it goes. We can discuss that more next week once we kind of figure out some more things. There's still so many questions out there, Will, of, like I said, how many players. Florida, we're recording this on Monday evening. Every Tuesday, Florida releases their updated numbers, and I think everybody's waiting to go kind of those numbers. From the last we heard, it was the 21 players affected, 2 coaches, and now Dan Mullen as well. So 3 coaches that we know of and all that, Will. So, yeah, with Tuesday, kind of everything we talk about here, just kind of remember, we don't know what numbers are going to come out on Tuesday that Florida releases from the Sunday, Monday testing, testing that they're going to do on those days. So, yeah, well, I think, as I said, we'll discuss it a little bit more next week, because I think we'll know just a bit more of testing numbers and when the team can actually get back together.
Sure. I mean, again, I think we all anticipated that something like this was a possibility. In fact, the SEC anticipated that something like this would be a possibility, which is why they decided to have the schedule be the way it is and have that extra week before the SEC championship game. Certainly, there's probably a possibility that game could get pushed back if other programs are affected as well. And Florida isn't the only program to have a COVID outbreak. They're just the program to have the most sort of notable COVID outbreak during the season. LSU and Clemson had this exact same thing happen to them during the offseason. It just so happens during the offseason, all you do is spend a couple of weeks without practicing. Nobody really pays any attention after day one. The reason this gets all the attention, well, 2 reasons this gets all the attention, because of all of Mullen's comments, made him a lightning rod, obviously, for sort of the national media. And then the other thing that makes it a continuing story is that there are games every Saturday, and Florida's not out there playing. And irrespective of what you think of how much fun college football is, obviously, if you're a Florida fan, you miss having the Gators out there, and you're just sort of champing at the bit, waiting for them to come back.
Yep. So we'll get into more discussion with COVID and all the positive tests. Mullen testing positive as well. We'll get into all that, but also, well, we know, and it's been discussed, the defensive side of the ball is the issue for Florida. I don't know how many more ways we can actually look at it than what we've already done from
It
a week
is?
ago. Yeah.
Who knew?
Who knew? Who knew? That part has not slowed down at all. We know that's the issue and that's the problem. But we're also going to look at ways the offense can get better. And look, it's called nitpicking here. Will and I have already discussed this. It is nitpicking. There's some things this offense can improve on, but by no means are we unhappy or anything, or just kind of picking at the offense for no reason. There are some improvements, and especially after you watch Alabama and Georgia this past weekend, you know kind of the offense that you got to have in a couple of weeks, when Florida and Georgia meet up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, we all saw Georgia play Alabama this past weekend, play them pretty well for about 2.5 quarters. And then, Stetson Bennett kind of turned into Stetson Bennett, and Alabama was able to sort of destroy that pumpkin there about halfway through the third quarter. But, there was the pass interference call that went against Georgia, that if they hadn't called it, then it's a field goal. It's a little bit closer game. I mean, I still think Alabama pulls the game out. I think Alabama's the better team. I think Alabama being at home probably made that an easier game for the Tide than it would have been maybe if they'd have been in Georgia. But here's the reality. Those were two really good teams. And I don't think that Florida's performance in the first 3 games this year suggests that they're on that level yet. And so they're going to have to improve on both sides of the ball. And that includes the offensive side of the ball, because the reality is that, whether you win 63-56 or whether you win 3-0, the goal is to score more than your opponent. And if your defense is struggling, then you got to talk about how does the offense, there's just no room for error for the offense. And there are areas where the offense has sputtered a little bit, especially in the second half. And that's something that they're going to have to improve on.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of looking at the rest of the week, since there's no game again this weekend. Florida, 2 bye weeks here, not normal bye weeks, of course. Wednesday, I'm going to do a YouTube Q&A. So all you YouTube listeners that are watching this live now or watching on YouTube, past the live edition, I'm going to ask you guys to join me live on Wednesday. Probably going to roll around at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday. We'll do a YouTube Q&A. Haven't done one of those in a really long time. I know I do a Twitter Q&A a lot because that's where a lot of my followers are. But for you YouTube listeners out there, if you can join me on Wednesday evening, that would be awesome there to have a conversation with you guys. So Quentin Lee, I know you join me almost every Monday night, man. Wednesday night, let's do it again. Everybody out there, Ivor Whitehead, all you guys, join me Wednesday evening. Everybody out there, go subscribe, like on YouTube, and we'll do a YouTube Q&A on Wednesday. That should be a whole lot of fun there. So let's move forward. But before we do, remember, you can find your Gators Breakdown merchandise at ebay.com/str/Gators Breakdown for your new look Gators Breakdown merchandise. That's ebay.com/str/Gators Breakdown. Remember, you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes and News4Jax coverage of the Gators. Please share, rate, and review the show on YouTube. Hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. Really helps us out here on Gators Breakdown. Or if you just want the audio version, check us out on your favorite podcast platform. Follow Gators Breakdown on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So so Mullen come out, of course, Saturday. All these football games are happening, and comes out and says that his initial positive result was confirmed by a second test, and I'm going to assume that meant confirmed on Saturday, since that's when he come out and put that there. I don't know for sure or anything like that, but that's just what I'm assuming here. It just comes after at least 21 players and coaches test positive earlier last week, and because of quarantining and because of contact tracing, Florida has fewer than 50 scholarship players available to play a game. Remember also 2 assistant coaches also tested positive for the virus as well, Mullen announced last week. So makes at least 3 coaches that we know of testing positive here. So everything is shut down as far as football operations on campus goes. And look, I'm not into to making political statements on here on Gators Breakdown. Never have, never will. Pretty much don't do it out there at all. But, so many are trying to connect too many dots out there as far as Mullen's comments and him contracting COVID and testing positive. And, did Mullen say he would like to have a packed swamp? Yes. Or meaning using that comment as kind of a karma or a reason he's contacted the virus? Yes, they are. Unrelated incidents. Scott Strickland pretty much said they know how it started with a couple players showing symptoms after testing negative right before the Texas A&M trip. Those players then tested positive when they come back from College Station, then explained their symptoms at the time. They traveled with the team. The virus spread. That's simple. We kind of know that story now. So with all that said, Will, the most important thing here is getting this virus under control. Everyone coming out of this healthy. Pretty big number here, and from the last time we've heard, and all those involved are either asymptomatic or have mild symptoms. But hopefully that trend continues, and everyone's on the mend, and we're back on the field soon.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest concern is the health of the players, the health of the coaches. I think for the most part, we expect the players to all be relatively healthy coming out of this. Obviously, they'll probably have to go through some protocols to clear heart health and those sorts of things that are associated with viral infections just to make sure everybody's okay. And it's possible that somebody might end up sidelined because of it. I think the bigger concern in all of this, it's been the concern with kids going back to school. It's been the concern with, little kids going back to school are the instructors and the staff and the coaches and that sort of stuff. And that's maybe where you start getting concerned is that if Mullen has it, who else on the staff has it? Are there people who are older who have it? Obviously Scott Strickland had announced that he had it as well. A guy like Steve Spurrier gets it when he's in the building, and all of a sudden it could be a real problem. So that's, I think, where people get concerned. It's not necessarily the 20 or 21-year-old who has the virus. It's the transmission of the virus from that 20 or 21-year-old to someone who can potentially be harmed by it. And that's always been the concern with the virus, just colloquially in real life, right? I mean, not necessarily just on the college campus. So that's the first thing is we hope that everybody's okay. The second thing is that, I don't know that, the virus isn't out to get people, right? I mean, it is a virus. It's something we have to deal with. Everybody who's been alive at this point has had the flu. I'm not saying the severity of this is like the flu. I'm just saying it's like that from the standpoint of you catch it, it's even more contagious than the flu. So it shouldn't be a surprise that when you get a bunch of people together on a plane ride or on a bus ride, that if one person has it, it's going to spread like wildfire, and that's what's happened. And, we've seen that with other programs as well. Now we're seeing it with Florida. It's not because somebody announced they're either for DeSantis's order or against DeSantis's order. It's because the virus is transmissible. And I think for the most part, people who have made nuanced arguments about the virus, that's always been a constant, right? There's been an acknowledgement that the virus is bad. There's been an acknowledgement that it's highly transmissible. But there's also been a discussion around the risk factors for the people who are going to be infected. And different people have different risk tolerances, which means people who have zero risk tolerance think it's ridiculous to even be playing the college football season. And you've seen people come out and say that this week with all the infections. But then you've got people on the other side who say, there's zero harm to people of this age. Why are we even concerned about it? I think most people fall in the middle somewhere. It just turns out that the people who are the loudest tend to be on both extremes, right?
Yeah, and we'll kind of go into let's get throw you some bones here for your most recent article here at Read and Reaction, and just kind of looking at the way and most of it's national media and the way they have perceived this and taking shots at Dan Mullen. Look, you and I both say the comments that he said after the Texas A&M game. Timing is part of it. It just made it kind of look petty that you're talking about crowd size and all that after you just taken a loss, and everybody wanted you to throw your defensive coordinator under the bus, not give credit to a Texas A&M crowd for being loud. And look, you knew what he meant at the time. Would you like to have 90,000 out there? Yes, so would I. I know it's not possible. That's kind of really all that boils down to. That we'd love for a full Swamp. We'd love for a full game in Jacksonville coming up in a couple of weeks. That's what makes college football. These crowds, we want to see it just because that's what makes college football. And then, of course, he doubled down on those comments Monday and then finally backed off a little bit on Wednesday. But like I said, a lot of people were kind of just connecting the dots and saying it's a aha moment or a karma moment or whatever. Look, if he was full, I guess, as you said, DeSantis follower and wants to open everything up and stuff. If he wasn't taking care of himself or doing what he needed to do, he would have contracted the virus months ago. And a lot for these players and these coaches out there. I think they're taking the proper precautions, or if not, this would have happened a long time ago. So I just think there's different ways of looking at it, and the shots that have out there have kind of been taken towards Dan Mullen. It's kind of, I don't know, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way there.
Yeah, I think two things can be true. Like Mullen shouldn't have opened his yap and said what he said. At the same time, and I said that last week. I kind of made a joke at the end of the podcast, mainly because, and we didn't know anything about the positive tests at the time, but mainly it's because I didn't think it was really a wise thing to put your athletic director and your university president under the spotlight, because you know where they're going next after you say that. Is they're going to your administrators and going, what do you think? And then those guys are sitting right in the middle of the firestorm coming from both sides, because regardless of what we want to think about this, it is a political issue at this point.
Oh, yeah.
It's become a political issue. You've got 50% of the population on one side, 50% on the other when it comes to these sorts of things, and you've got different states with different policies and all sorts of different stuff. And you can have your opinion one way or the other, but the reality is that it's a divisive issue. And so it probably wasn't wise to wade into that sort of thing. But that's who Mullen is. And that's kind of what I pointed out in the article, is that, Mullen has not been shy about his support for Black Lives Matter and his players. That's also a divisive political issue. I think, let's be honest. I mean, there's a significant segment of the population that doesn't like the Black Lives Matter on the court at NBA games, that doesn't like the names on the back of the jerseys, those sorts of things. And that segment isn't going to like when the head coach of the University of Florida decides to wade into those waters. Whether you think it's right or wrong, again, I'm not saying what I believe. I'm saying it's a divisive issue. He's been divisive when it comes to going after rivals, right? I mean, he's certainly gone after Kirby Smart, which is fine if you beat Kirby Smart. And that was always the thing about Steve Spurrier, is he had those barbs, but Peyton Manning couldn't say anything when he was sitting in his third Citrus Bowl. But when Kirby Smart keeps beating him like a drum, well, you look a little bit foolish when you're going after him. And in particular on the recruiting side, where he said some things about Justin Fields, and then Chris Steele leaves, and just the reflection that has on the program. So again, and he's also said some things about the fan base, where he sort of asserted that we weren't pulling our weight, that I took offense to personally, and wrote about that. So, this isn't a surprise. Mullen kind of shoots from the hip. He tells people what he really thinks. We say we want authenticity, but then when someone's actually authentic, we slam them for it. I'll tell you what, the reality is after spending 2.5 years of covering Dan Mullen, I'm a little bit both surprised and disappointed that he apologized. Because if that's what you really feel, then say it, have it out there, and deal with the consequences. If it's not how you feel, then you shouldn't have said it in the first place. And I suspect it's more somebody told him you better apologize, and so that's why he apologized. And one, that's not really Dan Mullen, and two, at that point the apology doesn't really hold much water. So, could it impact recruiting? Can somebody use it negatively as recruiting? Maybe. But I don't think so. It's not as though we're...
There's also a story out there by Mark Wheeler from Inside the Gators. A parent has been in this, he put out a parent there, Avery Helm's dad, and saying he agrees with everything Dan Mullen has, and with this program has handled the situation since last week, and they feel in great hands.
Well, and that's the thing, again, that I tried to point out, is that you can say all these things about Mullen and his personality, and it can rub you the wrong way or rub you the right way, depending upon who you are. But the one thing that no one has said in any of these articles talking about how he learns about COVID-19 the hard way and all that sort of stuff, no one has pointed out a place where Florida was even remotely lax with their COVID protocols.
Yeah.
And if somebody can point out where they were lax with their protocols, then bring the hammer down, right? Because you knew that this was a risk, and if you were lax in your protocols and then the pandemic runs rampant through the program, okay, well, maybe that's on the head coach or the staff. But
and to this point, Will, the SEC has fined 3 schools for not taking the proper protocols, and Florida wasn't one of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, so again, I go back to, if he's done something fundamentally wrong that has caused him or his players to be infected, then okay. But if it's just he agrees with Governor DeSantis, and so I think he's evil, well, I don't think that's right. And if it's, people taking glee in somebody who's, 48, 49 years old, getting infected with a virus that's killing, 200,000 people, I don't take a whole lot of glee in it. I look at it and I say, I hope he gets better. I hope the whole team gets better. I hope they don't transmit it to anybody else who's out there. From the start, I've been saying I think that this is something we need to take seriously, but that we need to have an honest conversation about risk. And, Mullen just sort of ended up on the wrong side of that honest conversation about risk, maybe a little bit too far on one side. Again, does it mean Dan Mullen's a bad guy? No, it doesn't. but he isn't someone who measures his words. Or at least he hasn't been in multiple situations where he's sort of gotten himself in hot water or just taken a position that would be unpopular within the fan base. You think about guys like Bobby Bowden. I can't remember a time where he said something that was divisive to Florida State fans. Even Urban Meyer, I don't really remember him saying anything that was divisive to Florida fans. Same thing with Steve Spurrier, right? Everybody loved him. His approval rating within the program, even before he won national championships, was really, really high. Jim McElwain obviously took a different tact and paid for it. And, part of that was he wasn't winning enough games. If Dan Mullen wins a national championship, no one will care. They'll put up a statue of him and put him on the Ring of Honor, and he'll get everything that he wants. But, the reality is you want to make friends. It helps to have friends, and he hasn't done a real good job of doing that lately, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's a bad guy. And again, the Lincoln Project thing that came out this week was really over the top, right? Tying him with Trump, saying that he has that he's treating the pandemic with the same sort of laissez-faire attitude as Trump, and that's why they've drained the swamp and that sort of stuff. It's like, come on, guys. Is this really the best? There are a lot of things that you can criticize Joe Biden for. There are a lot of things you can criticize Donald Trump for. Coronavirus at the University of Florida shutting down a couple of games, I think, is one, low on the list in terms of importance, but also low on the list in terms of being able to blame the president of the United States. So who knows, man? I'm sure I'll get slammed for that. That's not meant as a political statement. It's meant as, I don't know how you connect that dot between somebody saying, yeah, I think there should be 90,000 fans in there, and then somebody contracting the virus. So, I wish him well. I hope he gets better. Hopefully he has a lot of time to watch film on defense, and, we'll sort of move on.
Yeah, so we'll go with it next. We'll get to the football side of it here just a little bit. And of course, the big thing now, of course, you missed the LSU game this past weekend, and now the Missouri game has been pushed to October 31st. So the schedule's been redone for the Gators here. LSU game will now be December 12th as well. And, once you look at the SEC protocols, Will, you can see why. People who test positive and are asymptomatic must isolate for 10 days from the positive test. They will also need a cardiac evaluation, clearance from a team doctor, and to go through an acclimation process. Those testing positive but show symptoms must follow those same protocols and also have at least 24 hours passed since having a fever without the use of medication to move on or to move out of isolation. All individuals with high-risk exposure also should be quarantined for 14 days. SEC defined high risk as any situation with more than 15 minutes of close contact, which is less than 6 feet apart, with an infectious individual. Well, you can bet that last part has happened, and you can see why, Florida had less than 50 players available and the staff also being hit. Put the Gators in the bind here with the travel and then actually practicing and playing a game of football. Of course, they were within 6 feet of each other. So, with the testing happening about a week ago, the positives can't return, Will, till about mid to late week this week. Those with high-risk exposure, not until early to mid next week. It's hard to pinpoint as we don't know exactly who has tested positive and when every single player that tested positive actually tested positive. So you can bet not everyone will be coming back at the same time. So in this time, you have to hope that all the players that are able watch film, get together in areas that they can. It's probably discouraged upon for even if you tested negative to get together in a large group. But hopefully, and there's videos out there of guys working out on Instagram and stuff. They're together working out. But get together, watch film, get in the playbook, have Zoom meetings, because there's no telling how long the practice window will be before the August 31st game against Missouri. And then from everything we're hearing now, maybe not till the weekend, Sunday, Monday at the earliest, for this Gator team to get back together. Now, that's not a lot of practice time for Missouri. That's not traditional bye weeks when, this is quote-unquote bye weeks, but even with normal bye weeks, you get, 2 practices a week in that scenario. Florida will be almost without 2 weeks of practice when they get together Sunday, Monday in preparation for Missouri. So, there's a lot of, ifs, ands, or buts there of what's going to happen when you go back and play the Missouri game October 31st. So for the staff, of course, those same meetings with the players, but also, Will, and kind of going to your point, this is more time to evaluate issues that we have seen on defense and come up with a plan to fix those issues.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe it's a silver lining, right? That people have time to watch film in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been able to before. They have an opportunity to simplify the scheme, especially on defense, which is one of the things that's been suggested. I don't know whether that's necessarily. I'm not sure that there's a panacea for the defense this year. I think that the defense is going to struggle a little bit, but rarely do you get two weeks to take a step back and evaluate 3 weeks worth of film on your players and send them cut ups and have them look at it and say, what should you have done here and why were we doing this? And all right, we don't succeed when we run this particular coverage set, and hey, these four guys aren't getting to the quarterback, so what else are we going to do? And it gives you that opportunity. And then the other side of that is if you've got guys out for practice early next week, then you're going to get guys who get extra reps. And it may be, one of the arguments last year, I think, in terms of having all four safeties sort of rotated and out, was that you never really had consistent reps for the guys throughout the week because you essentially had four starters. They've done kind of the same thing on the defensive side of the ball this year, where they've just rotated guys in and out. And obviously you do that to keep people fresh, especially with the lack of practice that they've had sort of coming into the season. At the same time, you need guys out there who know the scheme, know where they're going to go, and trust each other. And maybe it's an opportunity, depending upon who's sick and depending upon who's quarantined, maybe this is an opportunity to establish some of those things. So, yeah, like you said, coming into this, it's probably going to go one way or the other, right? Either the time off is really going to hurt them, and we're going to see that immediately against Missouri, or the time off's going to give them an opportunity to come together, maybe get a little bit closer, build some of the trust that they need on the defensive side of the ball. Because a lot of the problems aren't necessarily schematic. A lot of the problems are guys not doing their job because they're not sure the guy behind them is going to do his job. And if they can sort of right that ship, I think the defense will improve.
Yeah, combination of a whole lot of things. Hopefully,
I mean, a lot of wishful thinking, but at the same time, like, you just don't know, right? I mean, when you go and look at the film, it's almost always like there are breakdowns all over the place, but it's one guy on one play, it's a completely different guy on the next play, and oftentimes I think sometimes the coverage problems sort of stem from one guy not trusting the other guy's going to do his job. And so getting in there, watching 3 weeks worth of film, and watching it over and over and over again until you get it just isn't something you have the luxury of doing during a season. So it's almost like you're pausing and restarting game one again against Missouri when you come out. And, obviously there will be a little bit less practice time, but in terms of understanding what Grantham's trying to do on the defense, they may get a benefit there.
Yeah, one thing on that, and I'll give a good shout out here to Gator Country, Nick and Andrew on their podcast. They had Juwan Taylor on, former defensive back for the Gators, who just played for Florida last year. And knows the scheme, was known as one of the smarter players on the team. You could question his physical ability all you want to, but even said, in what he's seen, and in a lot of, of course he's watching every game and still knows the players on the team. Guys are backing off on wide receivers, and he doesn't know why. He said, in that coverage, from what I know of this defense, these guys should be up on the receivers. And he goes, he doesn't know why. He goes, he even said it's not the coaches telling him to do that. They have to know where the down and distance is. They have to know where that marker is, and they are lining up too far. So I think you can kind of, I guess, trace that back to coaching if you want to. If a guy is going to continue to do that, then why do you have him out there? But also, there's the aspect, and just looking at that pure play, that's on the player themselves of not lining up where they're supposed to line up.
Sure. I mean, now I think part of it is probably incentive structures. I don't know how much they got yelled at after that Ole Miss game, but people got beat deep consistently against Ole Miss, and just deep the whole game. And then against South Carolina and even against Texas A&M, there were a couple of deep plays for A&M, but A&M wasn't bombing them the same way Ole Miss was. And, it's entirely possible that the coaching for the 2 weeks leading into A&M and even South Carolina was keep the ball in front of you, right? Do not get beat deep. Don't let the deepest guy, you tell that deep safety that he's got to be the deepest guy. Well, then he's not going to come up on he's not necessarily going to make the right read if he's reading the quarterback's eyes in the zone, those sorts of things. So, yeah, I mean, there is no easy fix here. Obviously, you need to know where you're lining up. It's sort of like I tell my son when I'm coaching baseball, right? It's if you do something the coach tells you and it turns out wrong, that's the coach's fault. If you do the opposite of what I tell you and it turns out wrong, then that's your fault. And that's going to be one of the things that they're going to have to do. Like if somebody's not if somebody's not doing what the coaches have asked, they're going to have to come off the field. The problem is how do you do that when you put the next guy out there and he's doing the same thing just in a different way? And that's the thing. If it was one player, they would have gotten him off the field and they would have fixed it. It's not one player. It's all across the board. And like I said, I think it's a lack of trust for one player to the next guy over. And all of a sudden, one guy lines up too far off. There's a third down conversion, and you're back to first down, and you're sitting there going, okay, well, do I trust that guy's going to pick it up the next time? And then you take a step in the wrong direction. All of a sudden, somebody's past you, and they hit a deep pass. So hopefully that's something that will get rectified over the next couple of weeks, is they'll identify the guys who are listening, even if they're physically limited or even if they're young, and they'll put them out there, and they'll live with the physical mistakes, so long as the mental mistakes and the effort gets taken care of. And that's maybe the thing that I think is our best hope when it comes to the defense is it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be locked down, but holy moly, like 3 punts a game. Like, can we force the opposing team into 3 punts a game? Can we get some turnovers? Can we really show some speed? When there's a running play, can we gang tackle? Can we see guys just run in full abandon and hit? Those sorts of things have been missing the first 3 games. And until those start to take place, I think it's fair to criticize the coaching at that point, because if you're not going to get full effort and if you're going to get guys making mental mistakes, you got to put somebody else out there.
Absolutely. So we'll move on to the rest of the episode. But before we do, a message from my bookie. And ever since I started Gators Breakdown, people have been asking me who's going to win, and a lot of the time what team they should bet on. Well, the best piece of advice is where you're betting is just as important as who you're betting on. And that's why I always tell people to visit my bookie. They've got deposit matches, free bets, and huge cash prizes for you to take advantage of all season long. NFL action? Check. College football? Check. Plus, they have a mobile-friendly website and top-of-the-line customer service, making their platform a one-stop shop for all your betting needs. And the best part is, MyBookie has hooked us up with promo code GATORS, which gives you a free $20 wager to get some skin in the game. It's low risk, high reward, which makes this offer a no-brainer. That's a $20 free bet to use on anything in the sports book, and it's completely on the house. You can't beat free, and you certainly cannot beat free money. Sign up at MyBookie today and use our promo code GATORS to claim your deposit bonus. Stacked UFC cards, presidential prop bets, and good times await. Sign up today to begin your winning season only at MyBookie. So, well, I was thinking about this before the Alabama-Georgia game this past week, and the offensive onslaught that we saw from Alabama versus still what I think is the best defense in the country, but it's an offensive game now. And I think Saturday night proved that. I think last season kind of proved that. We've kind of gotten to this point of offenses taking over college football. But I saw some stats last week from our friend SEC Stat Cat, and that got me thinking now. And once again, I'll kind of intro it with this. I don't want to make it sound like I'm not happy with the Florida Gator offense. That not to be the case if you've listened to this podcast. So, now we can admit it's not perfect. It's darn near elite, but there's some small things that we think this offense can work on to take that next step, and there's some areas of improvement. So that's all this is here. Is Florida offense capable of hanging in any game? Absolutely, but we can identify some things that here to reach another level. And against better defenses that Florida's going to see as this season goes on. So, some of these StatCat rankings and numbers came out last Friday before this past weekend's games, and Florida's ranking and all this much won't change since they didn't play this past weekend, and a lot of its percentages and stuff like that. So, like I said, this is nitpicking because there's so much good with this Florida offense, and we'll start there, Will. Florida is the top-ranked team in the SEC in percentage of drives resulting in scores. Florida has scored on 70% of its drives, right in front of Alabama, who has 69%. Can we get the ball to the offense more? I know that's more on defense, but we'll start with the good there. I mean, I didn't know that stat until looking at it. And look, we've known that this Florida offense has the ball that they're going to score, but they have scored 70% of the time they've had the ball.
Well, they've had to, right? Well, it's interesting. The game that they wound up putting up all those points against Ole Miss and all those yards, one of the reasons they put up all the yards is because Ole Miss was scoring in 2 or 3 plays, and so it was just up and down the field. The South Carolina game, they struggled in the second half to put up a whole lot of yards just because they didn't really touch the ball. You can kind of say the same thing about the game against A&M, where just Mond and company held the ball an awful lot in that game and were able to keep it away. I mean, the telling stat for me is that when you look at yards per attempt through the air, Florida's ranked 7th at 9.7. Alabama's first at 12.8. But last year, 9.7 would have been 8th. So they're tracking with what last year's stats would be. And if you look at a team and say, where do I think Florida has a strength? Obviously, the passing game is where you think so. But they haven't been terrible through the ground either. Overall, they're 3rd in yards per play at 7.4. Yards per play correlates very heavily with scoring. Florida scored an awful lot. The reason they're scoring a lot is because they're averaging more than 7 yards a play. When you do that, you can convert a 2nd and 14 after a penalty, right? I mean, we all remember the Doug Nussmeier days where 2nd and 14 was a death sentence.
Might as well go ahead and punt on 2nd down.
May as well, right? I mean, and you just hoped that all the guys on the defensive side of the ball could hold on. We're the exact opposite of that coin at this point, where you just hope that we can put it in for a touchdown rather than a field goal, because a field goal probably isn't going to win the game. It's not quite the UCF Memphis game this past weekend, but bordering on that. And the offense has been fantastic from a statistical standpoint, no doubt about it. They have put the ball in the end zone a lot. McPherson really hasn't come out and had to make a whole lot of field goals. I mean, he made the one against A&M. I think he made one against South Carolina, or 2 against South Carolina maybe. But for the most part, they've been putting the ball in the end zone. When they get in the red zone, they're not getting stopped. Obviously, you've got sort of a cheat code in Kyle Pitts when you get into the red zone. We'll get into that because they do look for him an awful lot in the red zone. But, I mean, look, when you're 3rd in yards per attempt or yards per play, the only thing you can say is, why aren't you better than Alabama, who's number 1? And if you're asking, why aren't you better than Alabama, because we're only 2 spots behind them, that's something you most of the time would take.
There you go. And that's why we're calling this nitpicking. Because put it this way. When you can nitpick, you're in a good spot. When you want to go back and listen to a podcast in 2017, that's not nitpicking. that's far from it when we're talking about offense.
Well, it's actually the same thing, right? It's sitting there going, with these guys on the field, I don't know how it's going to change. Yep. I don't see any way it's going to change. Good God, Nussmeier, please stop calling the run on 2nd and 12 or whatever, or stop calling the play action pass on 3rd and 17.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. And we're the complete opposite now, where we're sitting there going, for the love of God, Grantham, just keep it in front of you on 3rd and 12. And hey, college football can be frustrating sometimes. Obviously, Florida has been fortunate to win multiple championships since we've been alive. I mean, just sort of dominated the SEC. You look at programs that are even really high-level programs these days, like Georgia. 1980 is the last time they were able to put it all together. And so it's a rare occurrence. Florida fans have been lucky to be able to see that. And, this is something that's going to happen, is that you're going to have sometimes where the offense and the defense are unbalanced, and the offense is going to have to pick up the slack here. And that's really why we're nitpicking is,
there you go.
Settling for a field goal may cost you a game. I mean, Pitts not catching that ball, or at least I can't believe they didn't review it, but the ball that got thrown out on the back shoulder throw where they wound up settling for the field goal, if he catches that ball, Florida, 1, runs a couple of minutes off the clock, maybe lets their defense rest a little bit more. 2, probably punches it in for a touchdown, so they're ahead rather than tied. And the game really sort of goes quite differently from that point on. And that's a very small thing. Pitts sort of slips. Pitts also looked like he was a little bit injured there in the second half. Trask doesn't make a perfect throw. The ball maybe hits the ground, and all of a sudden you're kicking a field goal instead of a touchdown, and that little thing may have been the thing that cost you that game. Obviously, it's not the only thing that cost you the game, but same thing with the Malik Davis fumble, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, Davis did a lot of really good things against Texas A&M. That one fumble should not have lost the game for Florida. You put up 38 points, you should win the freaking game. But because of the defense, there's just no margin for error.
Yep. So, all right, well, I'm going to start with explosive plays. And, that's passing plays of 20 yards or more, and then run plays of 10 yards or more. So, the Gators have, and for them, pretty much coming off in the passing game here. And I don't think it's nitpicking when you look at the run game explosives here. Runs for 10 yards or more. So that's how that goes for the run. Florida has 17 explosive passes compared to 6 explosive runs. So they're pretty much non-existent through 3 games, and to me, it starts up front for Florida. While this offensive line, we've given it credit, is better than it was last season, still not consistent enough in the run game, and the stats really show that, to me, it's affecting the running backs and the type of gains that they can make. So I got this thought, StatCat showed, quote, on Twitter last week, quote, Florida had its typical issues creating run lanes versus Texas A&M. The Aggies held the Gators to a paltry 1.1 rush yards before contact average. At least Florida averaged over 3 yards after contact with a 47.6% broken tackle rate. Still, only 2 10-plus yard runs. So there you go. You can nitpick a little bit in that game. If Florida's able to run the ball a little bit better, maybe you come out winning that game. So, that's showing that the Florida running backs, they're creating a lot of their own yards. While the run game is better than last season, it still struggles, in this offensive line still struggles blocking at the point of attack. And, while the backs are doing a good job making something out of nothing, the potential for big plays is taking hit because those guys are getting hit in the backfield and they're just having to rally themselves to go get 3 or 4 yards. And if they're not getting hit in the backfield, then the potential for bigger plays is there. And I went back and looked at it, and the stats really tell the story. And stats don't tell the story all the time, but it really does here. Through 3 games, Kadarius Toney has the longest run with a 50-yarder in the opener. That's an issue. Kyle Trask, on a speed option keeper of 19 yards, has a longer run than Dameon Pierce. His longest is 14 runs, and Naquan Wright, whose longest is 11 yards. I mean, that's astonishing right now that Kadarius Toney, that part not necessarily all that surprising because of the type of player Kadarius Toney is. Okay, you expect that. But for Kyle Trask to have a longer run than Dameon Pierce and Naquan Wright at this point through 3 games, that is worrisome.
Yeah. I mean, so I was looking up some splits on StatCat today, and between the left tackle and the left guard, they're averaging 2.9 yards per rush over the first 3 games. Outside on the left-hand side, they're averaging 8.6 yards per rush. Behind the right guard and the right tackle, they're averaging 3.3 yards per rush. Outside the right guard and the right tackle, they're averaging 9.4 yards per rush. So when they get the ball outside, they're being successful. But getting the ball outside basically means that the running back is having to bounce the ball after the left tackle is getting beaten. That's one of the things you really see in the rewatch against A&M is Stone Forsyth got beaten quite a few times. I'll tell you, the one thing I have seen is that Kyle Pitts looks like he's really improved as a run blocker. But it's sort of been offset by the fact that I think Ethan White, I think they're missing Ethan White. They're on the offensive line, having to put Brett Heggie at center, which then means you've got Garage and Reese at guards. They just haven't been moving the pile very much. And the other thing is, I praised Mullen last year because the offensive line was so bad that he basically went to 60% passing plays. But this year he's at it again. He's got 35.3 passing attempts per game, 25.7 rushing attempts per game. And you could say, well, it's because we're not running the ball very well. But in the first half against Ole Miss, 14 rushes for 96 yards. And one of those was the 50-yard run for Toney. In the second half, 15 rushes for 100 yards. So they ran the ball in the second half against Ole Miss. And to be honest, that's the only second half where the Florida offense has really looked untouchable. You go to the South Carolina game, 14 rushes for 67 yards. So not only were they rushing the ball, but they were being reasonably successful. Then 10 for 13 in the second half. And then in the first half against Texas A&M, 15 for 73. And in the second half, 9 for 17. So not only are they going away from the run, or at least they've gone away from the run against South Carolina and Texas A&M, but they've been a lot less effective in the second half than they have in the first half. One of the things that I think you saw with A&M is that they just came out and said, hey, we're going to be a smash mouth team. We're going to run it right down your throat. We're going to force you to stop it. When Florida couldn't, then the defense got gassed. The Florida offense hasn't really had an opportunity to gas the opposing defense because, one, they're scoring so quickly, but two, they just haven't put the ball on the ground. Again, it's hard to criticize them because they're scoring so often. At the same time, I do suspect that that's part of why the offense has sputtered considerably in the second half compared to the first half is not only have they put the ball on the ground less often, but they've also been less effective when they're doing it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, and that is definitely part of it. I think it's hard to get in the groove. especially for the running backs too, because they split the carries up so much. So one guy getting into a groove is pretty difficult, and I know that's kind of been one complaint, if you want to say. But one guy, some people out there want a workhorse to kind of take over the run game there, and it is hard to get in the groove. But I kind of look at it too, Will. In this, the big gains in the run game should be easier, as much as Florida is throwing the ball with success. That should be backing defenses off and opening some of the running lanes for the offensive line to create. But it's not. Florida is dead last in the SEC for teams that average the most rush yards before contact, with only 1.2 yard average. But as I said, the running backs are making the most out of that. And that shows up, and here's some good news here. That shows up by the Gators ranking first in the conference with the best rush yards after contact, with 3.91 yards after contact. I mean, the running backs are doing their job up there of making something out of nothing. So, they're making their own yards with the issues up front. And Florida was next to last in number of explosive runs, and that was before this weekend's games, as of course Florida isn't going to have those numbers. But still, Florida is second to last in the SEC in explosive run play percentage. Last place is Mississippi State, who doesn't even run the ball.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you said there that's really disturbing is that they're getting hit in the backfield. Yep. Right? I mean, the stat that you said about, number of yards before they get contact means they're getting hit in the backfield an awful lot. They're making adjustments off of that, but let's be honest, that isn't going to cut it against Georgia. When you get hit by Georgia 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, you're going to be facing 2nd and 12. You're not going to bounce off most of those guys and run for 4 or 5 yards. What'll probably happen is you'll bounce off and get tackled for 3 more yards back than you would if you'd have just gone down when you got hit. The reality is we saw that speed against Alabama. If for some reason Florida pulls off the win against Georgia and then goes to play Alabama, it's going to be the same deal, right? Is that if the defensive line is spending the afternoon in the backfield, you're really going to struggle. And I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but Trask was getting hit an awful lot, even on balls where he was throwing, on time, and you wouldn't really think that he was going to get hit. You looked at it and said, okay, well, it's not a big deal. It hasn't really gotten it hasn't gotten to a point where it's causing problems yet. Against some better teams, it may turn out that it causes some problems. So, yeah, they're going to have to shore some things up. Hopefully, that's the other thing, is with a couple of weeks off, hopefully this will allow Ethan White to come back, because all the reports out of camp were that he was really an effective guy there at center, and it just sort of cascades the whole way down the offensive line in terms of allowing guys to be in the roles where they can be, and then having really effective backups if you have to bring somebody in a reserve role.
And as we said, to kind of intro this, it is nitpicking because, right now, Florida's the third most pass-happy team in the SEC. That's only behind Mississippi State and LSU, throwing 62% of the time. It should be easier to run the ball, like I said, but perhaps still passing so much due to the lack of explosives in the run game. Your best chance for an explosive play is through the air, and I think the coaches know that. But as I said, I'd kind of like to see the offensive line maybe try and get into a groove, the run game trying to get into a groove, but it's hard to do that when you can go out there and score, and you have to score because of the defense. So, all the explosives are coming through the air, and as of last week, Florida was the third most explosive pass offense behind Alabama and Ole Miss. And I'll get to that later, but that stat, is even better by Alabama when compared to Florida. So we'll nitpick that too of what Alabama's doing. But Florida still will, even with that getting hit in the backfield, Florida's still avoiding a negative play. And kind of to your point, though, can that continue when you play some better defenses coming up? But still avoiding the negative play, as Florida's ranked 4th in the SEC with the lowest negative play rate. But in the run game, still having issues of controlling the line of scrimmage, of course. So, Will, I think a lot of it, too, what we're going on to is situational offense with this. And you kind of go into your point that you made earlier about in the third quarter and in the fourth quarter, when we'd like to see a run game take over, Florida's got to go score points. And, they're still passing the ball. Offense job is to score points. That's what they're supposed to do. They're doing that, but maybe not throwing the defense back out there, running the ball would help. Once again, it's nitpicking, but situational football is pretty big. And look, you probably can make that assumption. Well, Florida may have been trying to do that versus Texas A&M on that Malik Davis drive of fumble. That was, I believe, it was the first play of the drive, right? I'm trying to go back.
he had hit him on a screen pass for a pretty big play.
Yeah.
So it was either him or Naquan Wright that he hit. I think it was Davis who had hit on a little crossing route to the running back to get open and really get out to midfield, which is why they were sitting there at midfield for the fumble. So I think there are a couple things here. One is that, yes, they have to throw the ball to score. I think they know that. And I think they're feeling the pressure of having to keep up with a defense that's less than successful. However, at the same time, I think one of the ways they could really aid that defense is by putting up a 7-minute drive.
Yeah.
And if they could put up in that game against Ole Miss, if you put up a 7-minute drive, running the ball down the field and sort of, step on their throat or just sort of take their will, right? And really announce your presence of authority. If you have the ability to do that, where you go 3 yards, 4 yards, okay, it's 3rd and 2, and you blast it right through and you get that conversion, those sorts of drives really sort of take the air out of the opposing defense, the air out of the crowd, and take the air out of sort of the offense coming back, because then their offense starts to press, because they know if they give the ball back over to you, you can roll off another 7-minute drive. And that's maybe the thing that's been missing. I mean, obviously up by a ton against Ole Miss, continued to score, but Ole Miss the same way, able to score. Against South Carolina, they didn't have any of those 7-minute drives. They just let South Carolina run like 3 12-minute drives, and then the game was over. So Mike Bobo learned a few things before they went and played Auburn last week, and figured out how to run out the clock when they were ahead last week. But and then against Texas A&M, Florida was up by what, 10 or 11 points there. Pretty. I mean, it was early in the third quarter, but at the same time, so A&M comes and runs the ball down the field, right down Florida's throat. Florida's defense is gassed. Florida immediately comes out 3-and-out, and it was one of those things where Trask takes a sack on the first play, then he makes a bad throw to Tony. He's off target to Tony on like 2nd and 16. All of a sudden, you're 3rd and 16. And then you just throw a little dump off to Malik Davis. The ball goes out of bounds 6 yards short. You punt it over, and the defense is back out there again. That was the opportunity for Florida to say, hey, you know what? First down, we're not going to throw the ball. First down, we're going to run it right down your throat. We're going to do the same thing you did to us. They don't have the capability of doing that right now. That doesn't mean that the offense is bad. It doesn't mean that the offense isn't pulling its weight. It just means, again, the reality is the margin for error is so small that you really kind of do need the ability to do that in order to sort of help out your defense.
Yeah, situational football. What it boils down to for me. So now kind of transitioning it to kind of what we saw this past weekend in Alabama, Georgia. All eyes were on that game. And believe me, and the reason I'm bringing it up, because Florida fans on social media, on Twitter, were watching that game saying, okay, what can we do here by watching this game? What are we going to do if, what we see what Alabama's doing, we see the success that offense is doing, or see success is having versus the Georgia defense that Florida's going to have to play in a couple games. So, I kind of wanted to look at Alabama's and kind of compare their offense and their explosiveness to Florida. And, and Florida was right behind Bama last week in explosives through the pass game. And those are passes over 20 yards, of course. And though Bama was 5th in the SEC in explosive runs, as I mentioned before, Florida was next to last in the SEC there. So you want to combine explosive through running and throwing, that's where kind of the difference is with Alabama, their offensive line and their running back talent that they have there. So, and looking at the passes, the explosive passes, they're not all equal. If we saw the formula for beating Georgia schematically, it's beating them over the top. And I think we wonder if Florida can do that. It's a different offense here when you look at what Florida does and what Alabama does. Different personnel. Look, as far as true wide receivers go, Florida doesn't have a Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith. Bama doesn't have a Kyle Pitts. So, different offense, different personnel. As far as quarterbacks go, pretty similar between Mac Jones, Kyle Trask. Give Trask that offense. I think he's doing the same things Jones is doing, vice versa here. So, how are the explosives different? And I detailed it a couple weeks ago in the Texas A&M preview a couple weeks ago because they had just come off of playing Alabama. And I wanted to know, if the Florida offense can do some of the same things, those explosive passes that we saw Alabama hit versus the Aggies. So I want to go to the common opponents, Will, and what Alabama was doing versus the common opponents of Ole Miss and Texas A&M. So Alabama versus Ole Miss, pass explosives of 22, 20, 36, 32, 24, 45. That's for 6 pass explosives for 179 yards versus the Rebels. Add a 35, a 33, and 39-yard run in there, too, to put that total up to 286. Florida versus Ole Miss, 22, 21, 71, 30, 25 for 5 pass explosives for 169. So only 10 less yards on one less explosive versus Ole Miss through the air, and to add in the 50-yard Tony run and then runs of 23 and 22 for an explosive play total of 264 yards on one less explosive. So pretty even versus Ole Miss when you look at Florida and Alabama, except giving an edge to Alabama in the run game with Najee Harris and the pure running back standpoint there. So now versus a better defense, and this is kind of where I think the separation happens just a little bit as far as explosive plays go and Alabama's style of offense. Versus the Aggies, Crimson Tide had 7 explosive passes. And here we go, Will. 78, 35, 20, 23, 20, 87, 63. Three of them over 50 yards at 78 yards, 87 yards, 63 yards. All that totaled up to be 326 yards of explosive passes. Only explosive runs of 12, 16, and 14. So they couldn't really run the ball versus Texas A&M as far as explosive runs go, the Crimson Tide. Florida versus Texas A&M, explosive passes in the air, 39, 21, 37, 26, 21, 23. 39 yards was the longest for a total of 167 yards of explosive passes. Run game, the only run explosives were a gain of 11 and 10. So versus Ole Miss, very similar, Will. Versus the Aggies, not so much, as Alabama was able to stretch the field to the tune of 159 more yards in explosive passes as compared to what the Gators were able to do. Florida's still in that game. Florida was still scoring points, but different style here. So I bring that A&M game up and the kind of the comparison up just because of what we saw Alabama do versus Georgia. We know that's the opponent Florida has to beat. Can Florida do it? Can Florida stretch the field? Can Florida go outside with the wide receivers, Grimes, Copeland, Henderson? Can they do anything that we saw that Alabama offense do versus that Georgia defense? So, Will, a common opponent that has a legit defense to Texas A&M, then this past weekend versus Georgia, still the best defense in the country, where Alabama was able to connect on passes 40, 38, 90, and 34 yards against Georgia. I mean, 40 yards. This is the best defense in the country. It still is. I don't care what Alabama did to them. They're still the best defense in the country, but still passing yards of 40 yards, 38 yards, 90 yards, 34 yards. I think it begs the question, does Florida have that capability in being able to go over the top versus an elite defense?
No. so I mean, look, you mentioned, Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith are special talents. You go back and look at their recruiting rankings. I think they were like 37th and 62nd or something like that. And the closest guy on Florida's roster is Trevon Grimes, and he has not shown that explosive ability yet. And Jacob Copeland, and he has not shown that explosive ability yet either. You mentioned the 7 explosive plays Alabama had against Texas A&M from their wide receivers. Florida has 8 all year from their wide receivers. They have 6 explosive plays from the running backs, though one's Kadarius Toney on a run, and then another one is, I think, Malik Davis on a run. But that means they got 4 explosives to the running backs. So the screen game, the little crossing routes, those sorts of things, they're getting pretty big plays. Naquan Wright's made a couple of 5 or 6 yard runs or 5 or 6 yard gains on pass plays into 21 or 22 yards. But that's sort of the thing, is if you look at them, you mentioned against A&M, 39, 21, 37, 26, 21, 23. Those are the explosives. You mentioned the ones for Alabama. Waddle gets behind you, it's a touchdown, right? And Florida does not have that ability. Hasn't had that ability really since Dan Mullen came to Florida, having that guy who can really stretch the field. I mean, maybe the closest is Freddie Swain, who was able to break one every once in a while, and obviously Swain isn't around. So, and you saw it a little bit against A&M. They opened up the game with a flea flicker, and the whole reason they opened it up with a flea flicker is that A&M safeties got torched by Alabama's wide receivers on double moves. The difference is it's a whole lot different when Jalen Waddle's running a double move than it is when Trevon Grimes is running a double move. It doesn't mean that Trevon Grimes or Kadarius Toney are bad players. It just means Alabama's got really, really talented guys on the outside, and Mac Jones is really good at delivering the ball to those guys. That's not Kyle Trask's role. Like, he's not going to go down the field all the time. That's not the wide receiver, at least at this point. We've seen Xavier Henderson a little bit go down the middle.
And it's not really Mullen's offense either.
No, it's not. Again, you mentioned nitpicking at the onset. I mean, the team's still scoring like 40
Yeah,
points a
right.
game. So,
I'm just saying, is that what it's going to take to beat Georgia? Is
well,
is is that what it is? That style? Yeah, do you have to beat Georgia over the top? If we go to last year, Florida had a little bit of success, but with no run game help, they were, and you said it over and over again, they were able to pinch Trask and kind of make him throw where they wanted him to throw. Can he force the ball down the field, and can the receivers help him in getting back there?
no, they're going to have to run the ball. I
Yep.
mean, that's what it really boils down to is they're going to have to force Georgia to bring a safety up because as of this point, Florida has not shown the ability to have a guy who can beat double coverage. You saw that last week. There were a couple of plays where Trask threw into double coverage to Trevon Grimes in the end zone. Grimes doesn't come up with the ball, and he certainly didn't beat both guys. The only guy they have who's beating double coverage on a consistent basis is Kyle Pitts, and Georgia's going to probably come up with some strategies to make it to where somebody else on Florida's offense beats them. I suspect Kirby will have a plan for how he wants to deal with Kyle Pitts. Now, Mullen will probably have a plan on how to get Pitts open. Pitts will probably have a pretty good game, but are you going to get him free down the field like they did against Ole Miss? I think that's probably unlikely, which means you're going to have to dink and dunk your way down the field in some respects. And if you're Georgia, you just sort of sit. And here's what I do if I'm Georgia. I sit back, I wait, I hope they run the ball, I stuff them, and then you get them to punt a couple of times and dare the Florida defense to stop your offense. That's basically what Texas A&M did. Was able to be successful that way. No, I think for all of the progress that Kyle Trask has made, and he's made significant progress this year. You go and look at the film, he's throwing the ball harder, his mechanics are better, he seems to be doing a better job of identifying his different reads most of the time, though he has locked onto Pitts a little bit more the last couple of weeks. He's made significant progress. I think they're going to struggle if Georgia is able to play too deep coverage and force Trask to throw outside to Copeland and Grimes. If you don't give him the middle of the field and you force him to the outside, I think that's a way you can beat Florida. At least you could slow down the offense. Again, I don't know that you're going to be able to stop Florida from scoring 27 points. I'm just not sure 27 points is going to be enough this year to beat anybody.
Yep, and look, we got plenty of time to look for Florida and Georgia. We know Missouri comes first or whatever, but kind of just looking at what Alabama was able to do and, kind of, like I said, nitpicking of what Florida can get better at. Can Florida be as explosive as Alabama? Can they take that blueprint that Alabama showed Saturday night versus Georgia, and can they apply it? And they don't even have to do it the whole game. Just apply it in certain spots. Because as you said, Will, Florida's going to have to run the ball. And that's just what it is. They don't have to run the ball all season. They do have to run the ball in one game, and it's going to be versus Georgia. I mean, unless something fluke happens, of course, and you take your chances or whatever. But we're just looking at it from a normal point of view, without any flukes or anything. If normal plays on normal, Florida's going to have to run the ball.
Yeah. Now, I mean, again, I think we saw Stetson Bennett turn into Stetson Bennett there in the second half, and so it's entirely possible that if Georgia's still relying on Bennett at quarterback. Look, Georgia's limited in that capacity. I mean, it's not as though I think he completed 45% of his throws or something against Alabama. Obviously, Alabama's a decent defense, but I wouldn't say they're elite because they certainly were not elite against Ole Miss the week before. And so I think Georgia can be stopped. Can they be stopped by Florida's defense is a different question, but I think they can be stopped. Same as I think Florida's offense can get more explosive. I think there's an opportunity to do that. Again, I think you go back and you look at the film. That's, again, one of these things where you have an opportunity over the next couple of weeks with the COVID break that you wouldn't have had before, right? You can go back and look and say, okay, how do I get these wide receivers involved in the game earlier? One of the things I think that was really unique about Kyle Trask last year is that he spread the ball around and threw to the guy who was open when the guy was open. That was really one of his strengths. It was the major difference. All of a sudden, guys who Felipe Franks never threw to were getting the ball. The minute Trask came in against Kentucky, that hasn't really been the case this year. You got Tony, who's got 18 catches, Pitts, who's got 17, Grimes, who's got 8, and then Malik Davis is the next with 8. Justin Shorter with 6, Whittemore with 5. We didn't even see him against A&M. Jacob Copeland with 4, Xavier Henderson with 2. Naquan Wright has 3 catches. Damian Pierce has 2 catches. So it's very, very top-heavy in terms of Tony and Pitts. And they're going to have to figure that out too, because I guarantee, anytime you're lopsided against a team that has more talent than you, and the Georgia defense has a lot of talent, anytime you're lopsided, they're going to find ways to take advantage of it. One of the things that's allowed Florida to move the ball the last couple of years is you didn't know which wide receiver it was going to go to. You want to cover on that side? Cool, we'll go this direction. Oh, you want to cover on that side? Okay, we'll go this direction. And then when Kyle Pitts really emerged last year, it's like, hey, we'll go right down the middle too. So that's, they're going to have to run the ball, but then they're going to have the wide receivers come down with some of those 50-50 balls on the outside, because they will at some point have to beat coverage one-on-one on the outside, and we'll see whether they're able to do it.
Yeah. I mean, and you go back and look at the Georgia game last year. There was that one catch on the sideline, that pretty throw to Trevon Grimes, where he comes against Georgia, comes up, gets his 1 foot down and bounds. 2 Georgia defenders are right there. Those are the throws that are going to have to be made to beat them. And look, and I don't want to just look at the Georgia-Alabama game from this last week. What did it take for Georgia's elite defense last year to look somewhat normal? They played LSU in the SEC championship game, and that type of offense. So the blueprint is there, and that's why we're kind of just nitpicking here. Does it look like we're being a little too picky here? Maybe. I mean, if that's what you want to call it, sure. But like I said, at least we have that luxury of we can be nitpicky with the offense right now.
Yeah, I mean, Luke Del Rio is not our quarterback, so Austin Appleby is not coming in.
Long sleeve Malik Zaire.
One thing I hadn't even really thought about until now is that they were able to rush the ball there against Ole Miss the whole game through, but part of that was they had Emory Jones coming in some packages. I think he ran for like 37 or 39 yards.
Yep.
And it's certainly one of those guys who tends to run outside as opposed to right over the tackle.
And I think he had a 21. I think I saw it, a 21-yard run in that game.
So they're missing a guy who could conceivably be a big portion of the offense. The speed option that Trask runs, they don't necessarily have him run that. Potentially against Texas A&M, if Emory Jones had been available, maybe they bring him in a package when it's an opportunity to run the ball. Make sure, get that extra blocker in, get 5 or 6 yards instead of handing off to Pierce or leaving it in Trask's hands to throw the ball. So I do think that makes a difference. I think having him back will make a difference if they've got him back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and before you go there, I know people right now probably in their mind saying Anthony Richardson. Are you really sticking Anthony Richardson in that game against Texas A&M when you have to score?
Come on, man. Bring him in against Georgia. That'd be the perfect time for him to get his first snap.
Hey, Mullen did that a couple years ago with Emory. I mean, not his first snap, but, of course, he come in and let Emory swing it a little bit in that game. But like I said, if you're trying to establish a run game from the quarterback position and Emory Jones is not ready, are you really sticking Anthony Richardson out there when you have to score? When you got to go score? Now, the 3rd and 1 or whatever, when it's a safe play and all that, okay, then you do that. But any other time on the field, I'm not so sure when you have to score.
Well, I mean, so this is one of those things where the lack of it being able to close the games out against South Carolina and Ole Miss becomes problematic, because if you'd have been able to close out that game against Ole Miss and you're up, 52-7 or 52-14 or something like that, then Anthony Richardson can come in and you can run a few plays. You can get his feet wet in an environment, the Ole Miss game's on the road, obviously, get his feet wet in an environment where there is no risk to him turning the ball over. And they haven't been able to do that yet, because each game, even though the Ole Miss and the South Carolina games have seemed in hand, the opposing team has come and made it close enough that you've had to keep Trask in the game.
Right.
And that's sort of an MO for Mullen. There were times, I think that game against Tennessee, we were really surprised that he didn't bring in Emory Jones there in the back end until really late in the fourth quarter. There were some games against, I think, some of the Towson or something like that where Trask
Vanderbilt
played.
Last year, Emory played, but Trask was probably in too long.
Well, I mean, but, at the time it was, okay, well,
needs the reps.
Trask probably needs the reps because he hasn't been the guy getting the first team reps, but that's no longer the case. But we haven't been ahead enough to be able to take advantage of that. And so, I don't – if Anthony Richardson's taking his first snaps against Georgia, we're in trouble. But he has to take his first snaps against Missouri if you're going to use him against Georgia, right? So that's one of the things with not playing Eastern Washington this year where that has an impact.
And not only that, Will, and I just thought of it right now, not having a normal bye week, when you can install things like that, when you have time to do that. But Florida doesn't have a normal bye week, and it's going to take all the practice time they have to get ready for Missouri, and then you got Georgia the next week. You're not really installing much new coming up for the rest of the season.
Well, and that's something that I think maybe is a little bit underrated here is because of the way the schedule's set up.
And hold on, before I go even further, it's not like the bye week has really helped Florida versus Georgia the last couple of years anyway, though. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise.
Well, so maybe. Except you do wonder whether it was closer because they had a bye week, though certainly it didn't help them with the wristbands. But I think one of the things that having that week off allows you to get healthy.
Yep.
They're not going to have that week off between the Missouri game and the Georgia game in order to get healthy, as opposed to I'm pretty sure Georgia does have that bye week.
They have it this weekend.
Okay, this weekend.
Yeah, they play Kentucky next week.
Well, so that may actually be a blessing for Florida then too. Is Kentucky's a pretty physical team?
Yeah.
I mean, they showed it against Tennessee. Obviously, it helped that Guarantano didn't know who thought he was throwing to the blue team or something. But Kentucky's physical and may wear down that defense a little bit. So you've got Alabama, then a week off, then Kentucky, and then Florida is going to be a little bit more finesse at the same time. If that front seven is a little bit worn down, maybe Florida could take advantage of it. So, we'll see. I think the reality is that Florida is probably putting in its game plan for both Missouri and Georgia this week, whether the team knows it or not. And if you can't beat Missouri without being able to prepare for Georgia concurrently, then you're not going anywhere this year, right? I mean, that's the reality. Is you don't want to look ahead past anybody. But if you're going to look ahead past a particular team, Missouri and Vanderbilt are sort of the ones on the list. So it is at least a nice thing that we're not playing Tennessee the week before Georgia, or we're not playing Kentucky the week before Georgia, because those teams are teams that Florida would have to prepare for. I don't know that they'll have to prepare for Missouri quite as much, at least on the offensive side of the ball. I think they'll just be able to go out and do what they want to do, and maybe throw in a few wrinkles then when they play the Bulldogs.
Yeah. Hopefully the time off doesn't slow down the offense at all. Because look, as we're kind of getting here, never settle. There's chances to get better, and this Florida offense is as good as they are. Can improve on a little bit of things here. So just pinpointing some areas we'd like to see. That's all this episode was.
Yeah, well, I mean, even Trask could tell you that. I mean, that play that he had, I don't know what he was doing. He had Malik Davis wide open for a touchdown, throws all the way back across his body to Pitts on the other side of the end zone. And you're like, well, I guess they really wanted to get the ball to Pitts. And the announcer's like, well, that's a designed throwback. I'm like, I don't think that's what that was. I'm not sure what it was, because you never see that. And I guarantee you that's not something that Dan Mullen has coached. That was somebody saying, hey, I'm really comfortable throwing to my tight end. I think he's going to get the ball no matter what. Problem is that the opposing teams see that too. There have been multiple times where Trask has just sort of said, hey, I think Pitts can get it in double coverage, and throws it up. There was the one against Ole Miss where basically it was a joint catch right in the end zone. And because of it, Florida gets the touchdown because of the joint catch. But that's not an easy play. And if we look back to last year, Trask made the easy play. He threw it to Freddie Swain when Freddie Swain was open by 5 yards. And maybe it was a 6-yard gain, but he threw it to him, and they were able to get good down and distance and convert the third down. Now that he's able to convert these 3rd and 12, 3rd and 13s, and has the ability and the confidence to do that, I do think he's letting it rip down the field a little bit more, which is a good thing and a bad thing, right? I mean, it means you're going to punt every once in a while because you get into a 3rd and 13 and can't convert, but it also means you might get more big plays down the field. So I think maybe it would be a good thing to pull the governor back a little bit and say, hey, let's take what the defense gives us, as opposed to always trying to force the ball into Pitts. Now, obviously, I think when you get in the red zone, force the ball to Pitts. He's going to make the play. But there is still something to be said for taking the easy yards the defense is giving you and making them pay somewhere, because the defense always has to give you an opportunity somewhere. And as the season has progressed, it feels like Florida has been taking advantage of that a little bit less and less.
All righty. Will, we went a little long, man. What you got coming up, reading reaction this week with no game again?
Yeah, so defensive breakdown. I'm sure everybody will love to see the film on that one. I saw some people in the comments complaining that we weren't talking about defense, so I'll give you that on the site, and then
it's not like we have done that for the last 3 weeks anyway. Okay.
Yeah, but in this case, we'll actually do the tape. The other thing is I've been working on a piece about Trask and some of the areas that he's improved this year, because that's one of the things. I think you see the stats and you look at the stats and say, hey, is this a mirage? I don't think it is. I think when you look at the improvement that you see on film, despite the things that the nits we're picking tonight. I think the overall product is better than it was last year, and I think there are some obvious things that show up when you look at the film where he has improved, clearly put the time in. And that's one of the things you read all the time, is that he and Pitts have spent an awful lot of time, even when they weren't starters and when they weren't getting a whole lot of playing time, building up that chemistry, but also just working and outworking their teammates and outworking their contemporaries. And I think you can see that in the film.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So look at that for readandreaction.com. Is that film review stuff? Is it going to be on YouTube as well? Is that what you're going to put a...
So no, these are probably going to be articles. So they'll just be on the website.
Awesome. But yeah, Will's got a Read and Reaction channel there too on YouTube. So guys, subscribe to that. And his site, readandreaction.com, and follow him on Twitter at WillMilesSCC. Will, anything else, man?
Nah, man, just hopefully everybody gets healthy and we'll have real football in a couple of weeks.
Yep. Reminder, Wednesday we'll do a YouTube Q&A right here on Gators Breakdown. So everybody in the comment section right now, be sure to join me Wednesday. We'll do it around 7:30 p.m. We'll do the YouTube Q&A right here on Gators Breakdown. I'm your host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.